this matter, but I have some bit of basic knowledge.
I think you'll be surprised.
Okay.
So, your mom and dad, Lou and Min, were they both born in this country?
My father was born in Russia and came over when he was 3. My mother was born in the United States.
And how did they meet?
They met through mutual friends.
I'm just going to make a little adjustment here. Do you care to expand on the mutual friends?
I think their names were Harry and Esther Schultz.
Oh.
My father was a lawyer, Harry was a lawyer. They knew each other, they were married, they knew my father was single. They thought my mother would be a suitable mate for him.
Was it love at first sight? Do you know anything about their courtship?
I don't know a whole lot about their courtship, but I think there was an instant attraction on both sides.
It's a very loving marriage.
Yeah, it was. That it certainly was.
How about their personalities? Were they complement each other? Or?
They did, in the sense that my mother was the captain. She was the take charge person. My father was a very passive, mild-mannered person who was happy to go along with whatever she did, and she took exceptionally good care of my father. She was a good cook and a good homemaker and made a beautiful home, and he was a very happy man.
But he was not exactly a slouch himself. He had a very distinguished career, and he had a tremendous amount of respect in the community.
Yeah, well, he graduated Central High School in 1904 and graduated the law school at the University of Pennsylvania in 1907. In those days, you did not have to go to undergraduate school. He went right into law school. He became a lawyer in 07.
And was Mom a stay-at-home mom?
She was a stay-at-home mom. She worked prior to getting married. She was a secretary and worked for different employers, the last one being a Dr. Charles Hirsch, who had an office at 9th and Pine. And their friendship persisted forever after the marriage. And many times Dr. Hirsch would be a guest at our house for dinner, and then I would drive him back to Germantown.
Min was a bright woman.
Yes, she was.
Really intellectual, really curious.
Yeah, and loved music. She was an excellent pianist in her day, loved classical music, and to the very last days of her life, used to attend concerts.
So one of the main questions, of course, I wanted to ask is about Mom's parents, Ida and Joseph.
Yes.
What are your recollections?
Well, I remember them both very well. They were both very respectable people. My grandmother went to night school to read and write English at the age of 60. And Joseph Gross was a businessman, and he always had business dealing with the garment manufacturing trades. At one time they sold sewing machines and knitting, sewing needles, and I think they called them tailor's trimmings. And later on they metamorphosed into the silk business. And they had a company called Anchor Silk, where they would buy the raw silk and spin it into yarn and spools and sell it to the trade.
They talk about the Alperts being the intellectuals in the family. How does that story get started?
I'm not quite familiar with that story, but it well could be.
Whenever somebody in our family did well in something scholastic, my dad would always say, "Oh, he or she is an Alpert."
That, I have to admit, is news to me. I always thought the Grosses were hot stuff.
Oh boy! So Grandpa Gross was in the garment trade, and where did they live in Philadelphia?
Well, they first lived in South Philly, around 6th and South, and then eventually they moved to 48th and Chestnut in West Philly, and that's where my mother and Dad, who lived at 59th and Pine, also met.
Where did you grow up?
And I grew up in Winfield.
Mm-hmm.
They moved to Winfield when they got married in 25, and then 29 they moved to Winfield.
Mm-hmm. Any special memories of Ida and Joseph?
Yeah, well, Ida was a very sweet, good woman. very neat. She was a little woman and had a very pretty look about her. And Joseph, as I recall, was very much into his business and very proud that he paid his bills on the first of the month, and he didn't owe anyone any money, and he took great pride in honoring his commitments.
So he had the other grandchildren that he would have been Sam's kids, right?
Yes. Uncle Sam, who was their oldest child, had 3 boys, Edward, Bill, and Richard. And they were all 5 years apart. And Edward eventually went into the ventilation business, the same business his father was in. In fact, he took over his father's firm. Bill worked for a garment manufacturer for many, many years, but unfortunately he died young. And Dick did a number of things, but usually sales-oriented.
Let's talk about the Waber side of the family a little bit. Your dad's parents, any memories of them?
Oh yeah, very, very distinctly. My father's father, Jacob Waber, lived to be 102. And he got around pretty well, and he was not ailing at that age. He just simply wore out. Now, my father's mother, Rebecca Waber, was blind at the age of 57 or 58. She developed glaucoma, which in those days was really not treatable. But she was still the boss of the family. She wore the pants, and she cracked the whip, and everyone did what she said. And my father had an older brother, Max, a younger brother, Dave, who unfortunately was killed in a taxi cab accident early in life, 2 sisters, Belle and Boz, and then the youngest was Morris Waber, who was a very bright man, and he was working in advertising in New York, and when Dave was killed in the traffic accident, he came in and partnered with Dave's partner, Harry Dackerman, and continued in the stock exchange. And Morris lived almost 98, and at one time when he was 95, they had a birthday party for him at the stock exchange. He was the oldest living member at that time.
You had a long and very wonderful relationship with Morris.
Yes, very close to Morris.
So can I ask if you remember, which holidays you celebrated with the Wabers and which with the Grosses, or did the two mix?
Well, I remember Christmas holidays, you'll pardon the expression. We would always go to Aunt Nan's house, and my mother would have Thanksgiving. And with the Wabers, they would have Thursday night dinners. So most Thursday nights we ended up over there.
Okay. These questions fun to ask?
They're fun to answer.
Yeah.
They bring back old memories.
Good. So, let's see if that. So Judy came along. You probably don't remember much before Judy came along.
No, Judy is about 2.5 years younger than I am. And she was always an independent kid and had lots of friends. And of course, Judy, at the age of 18, went to Michigan, met her first husband, Bill Osterman there, was married at 19, and left to live in Toledo and never came back.
But you guys have always remained very close.
Well, it's funny. We are extremely close now, but when my mother was alive, my mother seemed to be the conduit for Judy and I. And they would talk frequently, and then my mother would keep me up on Judy. When my mother died, Judy and I got very close because there was no conduit anymore, and we had a direct connection.
Now, as young as Judy got married, you were a different story.
Right. I didn't get married until I was 36. I had met June almost 4 years before. We went out together. We had a little rift for a couple years, and we made things up, and we got married. And as you know, we got married the weekend of your bar mitzvah.
1965, June of 65.
June 65 was the time.
So you have a milestone coming up anniversary.
And, well,
45.
we'll have the 45th
Yeah.
coming up this coming June.
Nice. So you married June in June.
June in June.
And that relationship produced Lizabeth.
Lizabeth, our daughter, who's now 43 years old. And Lizabeth she married Stephen Raynes, a wonderful guy, a young lawyer, who gave her two beautiful daughters, Lillian, who's 12, and Katie, who'll be 9 in February. And two beautiful kids.
Taking a step back again, on the gross side, your mom had 3 siblings.
That is correct. The oldest was Sam, who, as I said, had the 3 sons, Edward, Bill, and Dick.
He was quite a bit older.
And, well, he was the oldest.
Mm-hmm.
And then next in line was Uncle Bill, who married very late in life. He married Betty when he was 64 years old. They were both living in Florida at the time. Betty was a widow. There was no issue with that marriage. And the youngest was your father, George, who also married pretty late in life and had children pretty late in life. And I think I've told you on a previous occasion when George had his 90th birthday and we went down to help celebrate, George was the best looking 90-year-old man I ever saw. He was a handsome, handsome guy. He had a great sense of humor and he enjoyed life.
So growing up, you had 2 bachelor uncles.
Yes,
And
make it 3 with Morris.
Right, that's true. So you had some role models there, and also some nice relationships.
Apparently, I was influenced more than I realized.
Any stories you can remember in younger years about my dad or Uncle Bill?
Well, Uncle Bill, of course your dad lived in Boston, so I didn't get to see him that often. But Uncle Bill and my mother were extremely close, and Bill, being a bachelor, would frequently be at our house, and we lived down in Atlantic City for a number of years, and many times on a Sunday dinner he would come down. Occasionally he would bring a date, and as I say, Bill and my mother were extremely close. And my mother felt very close to George too, but there was that distance factor. He wasn't there.
Bill used to come, if I recollect, and spend pretty much the height of the hurricane season with Min and Lou in Atlantic City.
Yeah, he would. Well, and he also the Bill and his father built a home in Ventnor, and they lived there for many years until both his parents died. Mm-hmm. And he sold it, and he still had a presence in Atlantic City. And as you know, Bill was an avid fisherman, and at one time was president of the Ventnor City Fishing Club. And that was really his life for many years. He loved to fish. And he also, another thing Bill did, which was unique, I've never seen it done before, he would take fishing poles and wrap them in silk, and different colors and different bands of silk, and then he would put coats and coats of lacquer on them. Mm-hmm. So that they shined, and they had a very distinctive look about them. Yeah. And I can still remember him wrapping the poles.
Uh-huh. So he made kind of custom-made fishing poles with his background of his dad and the silk. Well,
he had poles the likes of which no one had. I guess he would give them for gifts occasionally, and it was quite a thing to get one of those poles because they were so unique.
He left me all his fishing gear, what was left.
Have you used it to any extent?
I've used it, and not only have I used it, it's held up all these years.
Oh, great. So do you have some of those wrap poles?
I don't know that I have any ones that are real fancy, but they certainly are one-of-a-kind type looking poles.
Right.
So it's funny that a man who used to go around telling everybody after 3 days, fish and guests
stink.
Yet he managed to spend a lot of time with Min and Lou in Atlantic City, and this is just before he was married, and I guess just after he was married. And they would spend, weeks.
Well, and then he would come, when he'd go to Florida in the winters, he would come to Atlantic City in the summers. And one summer that he came, he really seemed kind of down in the dumps. And we realized that's because he missed Betty.
Mm-hmm.
And when he got back to Florida, they got married very quickly.
Mm-hmm. He loved to drive.
Yeah, he was a good driver, loved to drive, loved cars. Remember, he used to have beautiful Packard cars.
Mm-hmm. And then later Lincolns.
Yes.
And where your mom didn't drive.
Mother learned to drive. Later in life, Mother did learn to drive.
One thing about your mom was she treated my sister and I as if we were part of her grandchildren.
Well, she thought of you as grandchildren, positively.
Yeah. And we didn't have any grandparents, and that was a huge lift in our lives.
Yeah, oh, she
huge impact.
She definitely thought of you and Anne as grandchildren, positively.
Mm-hmm. And she took a great interest in both of us.
Yes.
And even when we were, young adults, she was involved with our lives and very wanted to take us shopping for clothes and have us come to Philadelphia and meet our boyfriends and girlfriends.
Yes, she was that way.
I'm going to stop for 1 second. So getting back to you, who do you think you take after? Your dad or your mom, and why?
I don't see myself taking after either one of them. I just think of myself as my own individual with my own traits or my own ways. I don't really see either one of them, although my father was such a decent, honorable man that in some ways I would like to think that he was a role model for me. But he and I were not possessed of the same personality, and we were different in that respect. And he was a quiet man, and he took his obligations very seriously, and he was a good husband and a good father, and I understand a very good lawyer.
Tell us about your career.
Beg your pardon?
Tell us about your career.
Well, I am a graduate of the Wharton School. I graduated in '51. I did not take college life seriously. I really didn't prepare myself for anything. And when I got out in '51, there was the world that I had to meet, and I didn't know exactly what to do. But one thing I did do that was a wonderful influence in my life. I got a job selling dresses on the road. And the first year I sold them more or less locally in Pennsylvania, Delaware, and Jersey as a junior salesman. And then I got a quote promotion to being a senior salesman with the firm. And they gave me a very interesting territory: Missouri, north of Route 40, Iowa, Wisconsin, and of course the Upper Peninsula. And it was a marvelous experience for me. Just getting in a car and being out on the road for 8 or 9 weeks with my line and selling dresses and trying to pick up a buck here and there was a great experience. Although I realized it somehow was not going to be my life's work. And eventually I bumped into a friend of mine that I went to college with. He said, "You ought to get into the building business." He said, "Al, believe me, guys who don't know anything are making a fortune." I thought, I definitely qualify for this. And I got into the building business, started building a few row houses and built bigger jobs. And then I gravitated to apartments where I kept the apartments and managed them. And as they grew in value over the years, my situation became better. In fact, I still have one building today that I rehabbed 30 years ago. I keep my office there. I've had the same manager for about 28 years. And it's something that keeps me busy, and it's also reasonably lucrative.
What do you think of the people in the last few years where the banks loaned them so much money and they built with no conscience of paying back, and if it didn't work out, walked away with little equity to lose?
Well, I'll tell you, I think in many cases that's always been the case, but if times were good, no one was really put to the test. But there has also been so much complicity with the lenders allowing all this stuff to go on and allowing unqualified buyers to step up to the plate and buy, and then packaging these deals in the form of stocks and selling to people all over the world. Wall Street, in my opinion, created this mess.
I'm really going to switch gears on you. So back in the early 60s, there was no J-date, no computers. How did you meet women? You were a very eligible guy.
What we did was just telephone numbers were passed around.
Mm-hmm.
Or you would be at a party and see someone or something, but typically it was phone numbers.
Uh-huh. So you had a long courtship with June. What are some of the things you remember about that?
Well, I remember how the situation developed with June, and this was a situation in which I took the initiative.
Mm-hmm.
I had very good friends who lived across the hall from June when she was married to someone else and they were married to someone else. And they told me, oh, we had the most beautiful, sophisticated English girl living across the hall from us. And then a few years later, they said she's separated. So I said, get me the number. And it took kind of a while for the number to be produced, but eventually I got the number and took June out. And of course, she floored me. I thought she was fantastic. She was so different from anyone else I ever dated. So I was knocked out immediately. I don't know where she stood in this. But the interesting thing was, Rita, the wife, said to June, June, I've given your number to Alfred Waber. He's a very nice guy. He's a friend of Howie's, but he's not your type. So, Rita, wherever you are, I don't think you were right.
That's pretty funny. So what were your interests, when you were younger, and what are your interests now, and how has that changed in terms of away from work?
Well, of course, when I was younger, I was interested in women, meeting women and doing whatever I could do with women, which usually wasn't that much. But it was a lot of fun trying. And I played tennis, and I had a lot of boyfriends.
Mm-hmm.
I grew up in Winfield, and we had a big bunch of guys, and we hung around together. And to this day, I'm still friendly with quite a few of these guys, and we play tennis together, we have lunch together, and so on. And of course, once I got into the building business, I was a small operator, and I had to do everything myself. And that absorbed me for years and years. I really had my time and effort and thought taken up by the business.
I remember you used to get up really, really early.
Oh, you had to. You had to be up early. And of course, I was a bachelor for a lot of that time. So that meant eating breakfast out and still being up on time to open the job. And it was hard work. It was hot in the summer, cold in the winter, and it was not easy.
You found a little time to entertain my sister and I when we were little down in Atlantic City.
That we probably did, yes.
And you did it with a big smile.
Right, well, it was not the hardest thing I ever had to do.
That's something that, I have never forgotten. And let's stop again for a second. So where did you and June first live when you were married?
We first lived in my bachelor apartment in Germantown at Park Drive Manor. And Lizabeth was 1 month old when we moved to the William Penn House at 19th and Chestnut in Center City. And that year had to be 66, and we have lived there ever since. We've been there 43 years.
You're a real Philadelphian, would you
Yes.
say? How was going from bachelorhood to parenthood in a relatively short time?
Well, going from bachelorhood to marriage was easy. Going from marriage to parenthood was a bigger leap.
Any memories there? Anything particular?
Well, just so fascinated to know that we produced a child. She was our child, and she was beautiful, and we loved her. And of course, as you know, when your children come, your life really changes.
How about grandchildren?
And grandchildren, well, they're the bonuses you get for not killing your kids.
What do you enjoy most about your grandchildren?
Well, just watching them grow and change and learn things, and just find that they're on their way to becoming young adults.
How do you think the complexity of the world impacts kids today, and how different is it? Do you notice?
They do have a much more complicated life. They have to keep track of many more things. I know when we were kids, I traveled with a big bunch of guys, and we would play ball every day, football, basketball, baseball, and season. But we did everything ourselves. There was never an adult in our life. We made our games, we made our arrangements, and we did it. With today's kids, of course, a lot of it is logistics. They live far from each other, so that the parents have to get involved in it and drive them and do things with them, and they're in more organized sports. Now, my granddaughter goes to private school. We watched her play basketball the other day. They had referees. We never had anything like that. So it's different, and of course the technology is different. The things that they can do on the computer and text messaging and a billion one other things they do are totally foreign to me.
So there's also the story about Uncle Bill in the bowling alley. What was that all about?
Yeah, well, my father, Uncle Bill, and Harry Schultz, his friend, built a bowling alley from an old garage in Germantown called Shelton Bowling Center. It wasn't big. It only had 12 lanes. And I think my father must have had it. It all fell to him because Uncle Bill wasn't around, and Harry Schultz wasn't well. So the duties all fell to my father, and it never turned out to be tremendously lucrative. But I used to like to go take the boys there on a Saturday and bowl. So that was fun.
And the pins, they used to have pin setters, right?
Well, in the beginning, the pin setters were human beings. You know, there were people that were paid by the game to set pins, and also tipped by the players. You'd roll coins down the alley for them after the game. And then later on, they did get automatic pin spotters. But early in the game, when I would take my friends, there were pin boys, or sometimes we would pin boy for ourselves, take turns.
That's interesting. And did you do any traveling at all? You know, traveling wasn't big when you were a kid. Did you guys go anywhere?
Well, the traveling that I remember doing as a kid was, I spent a couple of winters in Florida, in Miami, with my mother. I had asthma, and they thought maybe taking me down there would help. And the second winter, I think Judy came down. And then my father came, I remember this, then my father came down at the end of the winter, and the four of us went home by boat on a ship that was really a freighter that took passengers too, a small complement of passengers. And I remember at certain ports they would stop and they'd be unloading crates of oranges. So I remember that trip very well.
Think that's where you developed your love of cruises?
It may have been, unbeknownst to me, that may have planted the seed.
On the banana boat, the orange boat.
Yeah, the orange boat.
Yeah. I remember traditionally Uncle Bill used to send oranges out to everybody.
Yeah, yeah. And I remember Uncle Morris always used to send stuff when he was down there.
Tell us more about the Waber side of the family, because I don't really know the questions to ask you there. It's still such a huge clan, huh?
They were. They're a very interesting group of people. Of course, Uncle Max was the oldest. And he was a dabbler in real estate and building. In fact, he put together an apartment job in Ridley Park, which is a suburb of Philadelphia in Delaware County. He built 64 units. He nearly lost it during the Depression. My father was involved with him in it. And when Uncle Max died, my father took care of it. When my father died, I took care of it for a number of years. And Judy, my sister Judy, and some of my Waber cousins, Max's sons, also had an interest in it, but I took care of it for a number of years. And then we sold it and made a little profit on it and divided the money up by everyone. And that was Max, the oldest. Then there was my father. Then there was Aunt Belle, who was a very sweet woman, a pretty little blonde woman, and she had a dress shop for many years. And she had loyal customers that would come to her forever. And then there was Boz, who was next in line, and she had also worked in Max's factory. Uncle Max also, in addition to real estate, manufactured dresses and things like that, and Boz worked in that factory. And they were a very tight-knit group. And the youngest was Morris, and he was extremely bright, as I say. And then there was Dave, who unfortunately passed away very young in a cab accident. As I said previously, Morris came down to take over the stock brokerage business. And they were a very tight together family, you know. They would stand up for each other, and if anyone had a problem, everyone else was there to take care of that problem.
Now, you mentioned Uncle Max. Now, I remember your mom coming to Boston and going to see Aunt Tilly. Remember Tilly
well,
and
there
Max?
was
Is that
Tilly
a different
Barmack,
Max?
who was a very good friend of Mother's,
Mm-hmm.
who was an opera singer who sang at Mother's wedding and Judy's wedding.
But she used to talk about Uncle Max, and Uncle Max, I think, had a daughter named Judy, and she married Martin Hearst.
No, that had to be someone else. No,
Mhm.
Max had 3 sons.
Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
And Boz had Tanya and Irv, and Belle had Bernie and Phyllis. Dave never married, Morris never married.
I'm pretty sure that these people that I'm talking about were on the Alpert side.
Possibly, yeah.
Did you know any of those people?
I don't know the
Tilly
Alperts. I remember
Alpert.
Carl Alpert.
Yes, Carl for sure. I think this is his parents.
And of course, I knew the Nathansons,
Mm-hmm.
and I knew the Greenfields.
Right. Your mom had a tremendous love of Israel, and
That is true. She did.
she was so involved with Brandeis. These things really were passions of hers.
Yeah, well, she felt very strongly about that.
And I know she took an interest in some young people. I believe it was the Marcia Hearst's daughter, and she sponsored her to go to Israel or something. I can't think of her name.
I can't place that. I can't place Marcia
Hearst, just like
Hearst. I can't
the
place
newspaper
Marcia Hearst.
Yeah, I don't know what her maiden name was. It must be Alpert.
Yeah, well, that may be. Yeah,
Yeah.
but that
They
does
lived in
not ring a
Boston,
bell.
in the suburbs of Boston.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, where was I? I'm gonna stop for a second.
Your great-grandparents, Joseph and Ida Gross, were both born in Lithuania, but they met in the United States. And they married and, of course, had their children. And I think it was a very happy marriage. And I think it was a marriage of equals, where neither one was the dominant factor, and they both seemed to get along very well. And I would consider them highly respectable people. You know, people that you can really be proud of. They were really grade A.
Were they religious?
They didn't seem to be overly religious, no.
So my dad said he went to a yeshiva.
I believe he was a yeshiva booker in Wilna in Lithuania.
Uh-huh.
But as I said, they met over here. And, I guess, I don't know if it was an arranged marriage or not, but I think it worked very well. They seemed to be very devoted to each other.
What happened to them? How old did they live to be?
Well, they both lived to be past 80. And I think Grandpa Joseph had some sort of a respiratory problem. And Grandma had stomach cancer.
That's interesting.
So that's how they both passed away. But they both lived past 80. In fact, all four of my grandparents lived past 80, which for that generation was quite an achievement.
Yeah.
As I say, Jacob Waber, Ada Waber lived to 102.
Wow. So how do you look at life now?
I look at it day by day.
With good humor.
With as much humor as I can muster, yes. Because, as you know, I'm 80, and when you get to be 80, you know that the end of the trail is nearer than the beginning of the trail. And you just try and have as good a time as you can.
There's old
and not
80,
offend anyone.
There's old 80 and there's young 80, and I would say without doubt that you and June, well, June's not obviously 80, but you guys, you think young, and I think your attitude's spectacular.
Yeah. Well, I think of myself as a young 80, I really do.
Yeah. It's a number.
Yeah. But on the other hand, it's a number that's up there. You know, I read the obits, and lots of people die in their 60s, so when you're 80, you're achieving a little something.
That is something. And what are you planning? What do you look forward to? I mean,
well, my planning is I still operate this apartment building, and I'm involved in it. Fortunately, I have an excellent manager who really runs interference for me. And because of current economic conditions, I plan to continue to operate it for some time. But one of these days, if I live long enough and conditions change, I would want to sell it and just turn the money into grade A investments and relax and retire.
One thing I notice about you and June is that you never miss a happy occasion, and unfortunately I don't think you miss any of the sad occasions. You're so family oriented.
Well, we are. We're extremely family oriented. June, I guess you don't know her family, her mother's family and so on. Extremely close to them. She and her sister, wonderful relationship. And she and her niece Pamela, just marvelous relationship.
And you have some nephews from your sister.
Oh, those guys, the fabulous Osterman boys. Well, again, the sad thing is I never see them. I haven't seen these guys in years. You know, our paths don't cross. We need an occasion to bring us together. Well, the last occasion was my 75th birthday.
Right. That was a wonderful weekend.
But that was over 5 years ago.
So it's always nice to get together. I think it was Aunt Min that said, one thing about Aunt Min, another thing was they could sit for hours. George and Min and Lou and Bill, my mom, but mostly George and Min and Bill could just sit for hours and just
talk old times, I guess.
I don't so much remember the old times. I'm sure they did. I guess they talked about, you know, where certain people were, and of course Uncle Bill was a great storyteller.
Yeah, and they were funny. George and Bill were funny guys. They had a great sense of humor.
Yeah.
And knew all the jokes. Especially your father, he knew all the jokes.
Well, he was in sales. He traveled around, and he certainly had an interesting life. And we miss him all.
Why did Sam and Ida move from Lithuania?
Joseph and Ida. You know, why would they move from Lithuania? I guess for persecution.
Oh, persecution and a better life, definitely.
Do you know who arranged for them to get here? How they got here?
Don't know. I don't know any of the details of their passage.
So that would have been near the turn of the century, or? It
would have been probably a little before. Well, yeah, I'd say in the early 1890s. And you know, Joseph Gross had a twin brother, Morris.
Is that who they call Moni, Uncle Moni?
No, Uncle Moni was someone else.
Uh-huh.
Uncle Moni was quite a character. He was a bachelor, he never married, and he was really a funny guy. He ended up in a small town in Pennsylvania, and when I was selling dresses, I visited him in that town and identified myself to him, because he hadn't seen me in so many years. But Joseph's brother, Morris was, I think he was a difficult man, and may have caused a problem here and there. But they were twins.
Uh-huh. Interesting. And Uncle Moni, they always used to joke about him that he was an inventor, and he invented the endless belt.
The ended belt, yeah.
What did that mean?
I remember having one, and the concept was not a bad idea because it was a belt that could adjust to any size weight line. And it did get manufactured, but it never seemed to go anywhere.
Uh-huh. So we never know what happened to Uncle Moni, huh?
No, but it was the concept was interesting. Well, I guess eventually just died in that small town in Pennsylvania. He had a store there.
Uh-huh. And Ida must have had some brothers.
I guess, now they had to be Alpert.
Yeah.
And I think they settled in Boston.
Mm-hmm. Carl's parents?
I guess it had to be Carl's parents, yeah.
And he went on to make Aliyah and teach at Technion.
Yeah, in fact, when Judy and I went to Israel, we visited him in Haifa in his home.
I bet it's beautiful.
It was on the hillside facing the harbor.
Haifa's spectacular.
Yeah.
Okay. Are you getting tired? The kind of mystery man in the whole Gross family and the 4 kids was the oldest, Sam Gross.
Yes. Sam Gross was my mother's oldest brother, and he was a brilliant man. He got what was called a mayor's scholarship to Penn. It was given by the mayor to some of the brightest students in the city. And he went to Penn and got an engineering degree. And then he went to Yale and got a master's degree. And he went into the Army, and I think he was a captain in the Army. And when the war was over, this is World War I, he got out and found that because he was Jewish, he could not get a job in the engineering field. It just was totally closed to him. So what he did was he and another equally bright man who was a friend of his, Morris Scheffler, who I think also got a mayor's scholarship and was an engineer, they started a sales firm and specialized in ventilation. And they became specialists at it, and they did pretty well over the years.
And he had a long illness, though, Sam.
He did. He had Paget's disease, which is either a hardening or softening of the bones.
Ugly.
And he was bedridden for years, and it was a long, agonizing death.
That was sad. Do you think, do you think much back about your parents? You took real good care of your mom, and she was in the same apartment building with you, and extremely
Well,
close.
I think of them all the time. There were so many things that took place over the course of a lifetime with both parents. My mother lived longer than that, about 19 years more, so that she could see more of my development. She could see June, she could see Elizabeth, so she could see that I was moving down the road. My father died in 1964, and while I was in the building business, I was just starting, and he really couldn't see the material results of what was going to happen, and he couldn't see the major changes in my personal life. So I always regretted that. I always wished that he could come back for 20 minutes and I could introduce him around.
Right. That's funny. That's something I think of all the time. I just wish people could see, the good things.
Yeah.
The good things. So, looking forward to the bar mitzvah tonight.
Positively.
And I really appreciate you sharing your thoughts. Is there anything I missed or that?
Well, I think we ran the gamut and covered the territory.
Very good. Terry now.
Well, with a little editing, that thing, he's going to get that thing down to 3 minutes, Terry.
A little editing.
There's
I got
some good stuff.
There's some great stuff. I'll make sure we share it with Lizabeth.
Definitely.
I will. Go ahead.
I want to just tell you in closing something about your great-grandfather Joseph Gross that always will stick out of my mind. When we lived down the seashore, I had a beach chair minding business where I would take care of people's beach chairs, put them in a pile away from the ocean during the evening, cover them with a tarp, and then bring them back and put them to the point that they'd like to sit during the day. And they would pay me weekly, and it was something that I did. I was probably 9 or 10 years old. And my grandfather, Joseph Gross, was always worried about my business, that they would take the chairs and they would do this and they would do that. And he would appear on the boardwalk, and I'd see him looking over everything. Now, right on the beach block where we lived and where my beach chair concession was a man named Senator Elkin. And he was a state senator from West Virginia. And he lived in the town of Elkin, which leads me to believe that he was a big shot there. And they had a huge beachfront house that went to block on Austin Avenue. And Senator Elkin would also like to get up on the boardwalk and look out and see things. Not my chairs, but probably look at the ocean. And he and my grandfather, Joseph, would be next to each other. And they were drawn to each other like the moth to the flame. And they were expounding their political views, and I'm sure they were opposite in every way. And I would see the two of them gesticulating with their hands flying. And this was a scene that would take place day after day. And I was only 8, 9, 10 years old, but I knew something special was going on then. And it's an image of my grandfather that will always stay with me, and Senator Elkin with their arms flailing and trying to convince each other that they were right.
So Joseph had some strong political beliefs.
Apparently he did. He never shared them with me, but he did share them with Senator Elkin, and they were obviously diametrically opposed.
That's a great story.
It was. It made an impression on me because I knew something special was going on there.
Mm-hmm. Did you ever outgrow your asthma?
I outgrew it for many years, and then it came back in a mild manner and in such a way that it became manageable.
That's great.
But I'm working on 50 other things.
Oh boy.